Is the first of four pre-conference seminars that we have. That's a benefit offered to some of our top level conference sponsors. So we really want to extend thanks to UMass Mass Woods program for being a conference sponsor. For those of you who don't know, check our website for information about the 2025 Massachusetts Land Trust Conference, which is coming up on Friday, March 21st at UMass. But today is about this specific topic. So without further ado, let me just introduce Paul. Paul Catanzaro, our speaker today, is professor of forest ecology and conservation at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. He serves as the state extension forester and co-directs the Family Forest Research Center, which is a partnership between the USDA Forest Service and UMass Amherst. So take it away, Paul.
Thanks, Rob. The pressure of being the kickoff webinar, I'll tell you, we will do our best to get this going the right way. May I ask, could people hear me okay and see the slides okay?
Looks good.
Great, thank you. So I want to start off the presentation today just by acknowledging my co-authors. This was, as you can see from the long list of authors, this was very much a team effort. I want to particularly note the role that Caitlin Littlefield and Brian Donahue played. While we all helped create the vision and contributed writing to this publication, it was really Caitlin and Brian who rolled their sleeves up and went through the analysis portion of this project and did just yeoman's work in getting that done. So I'm grateful to all my co-authors, especially Caitlin and Brian. And I'm here today to talk about Beyond the Illusion of Preservation. I want to start with just a little bit of background here, just to make sure we're all on the same page, set the stage here. Forests change through time. We have everything from pre-forest after a large disturbance to the development of young forests, a lot of vigorous competition, to mature forests, which is where we generally are now in our forest condition across Massachusetts. And then after time, they can develop into old forests. And so we have this change in species composition. Some species are found earlier in forest development. Some species are found later in forest development. And we also have changes in what we call structure. So structure being the physical parts of the forest change. So trees get bigger, some trees die, they develop gaps after a wind disturbance and dead wood develops. So forests tend to get more complex through time as well. So there's different species composition and different complexity to the structure over time. Those two elements, species composition and forest structure, are largely where we derive our forest benefits. And oh boy, do we have lots of forest benefits. And those forest benefits change through time, just like the species changes and the structure changes. And as that species and structure changes, so do those benefits. So the benefits we see in pre-forest, things like chestnut-sided warblers, fiddle-leaf butterflies, are not the kinds of habitats and benefits that we see in old forests. And so we have this, really blessed to have all these many gifts from forests that change through time. And I would suggest to you that our goal is to sustain all of these benefits. And in order to do so, we need a variety of approaches out on our landscape that help maintain the species and structure of those different stages. Balance is not necessarily where lots of people are thinking, though. We've had, of course, this climate crisis, or we're having, present tense, unfortunately, we're having this climate crisis, and there has been a sort of an awakening to the importance of forests, a real broad awareness of the role forests can play in sequestering and storing carbon. And you can see from this, you may be familiar with this graphic from the Nature Conservancy. It's been in a lot of places. It's a wonderful graphic. Those top three elements all deal with trees and forests. So forests are, in fact, this tremendous ecosystem for helping us to mitigate climate change. The danger, I would suggest, is that we seek to maximize not just carbon, but we seek I think we find issues when we try to maximize any particular benefit from forests, whether it be early successional habitat or late successional habitat or wood products, or in this particular case, carbon. There is a real move now to sort of focus in on one benefit and the species and structure that lead to that benefit at the peril or at the decline of the balance, that large diversity of benefits that we receive from forests. So that's the danger, zeroing in and maximizing one benefit at the expense of the others. And in today's world, that one benefit tends to be carbon. I think the example I would give that maybe helps exemplify this or illustrate this best is the recent report from the Climate Forestry Committee. So the EEA gathered together a group of experts to talk about the state of carbon and its implications for forest management. I, in fact, was on the panel, and the panel or the committee produced a report. And I want to highlight one sentence from that report that I think exemplifies this idea of maximizing carbon at the expense of other benefits. So in the report, it says, committee opinion on the wood production differed profoundly. Oh boy, did it. Others argued, so just for some backdrop, about 3/4 of the committee suggested that it would be a benefit to increase local wood production. But others argued that our forests are better suited for removing and storing carbon, and those elsewhere, and the emphasis is mine, should produce Massachusetts needs. A really sort of stunning statement, especially in a report like this. And it really, to me, exemplifies this idea that for some people, maximizing carbon at the expense of other benefits and potentially at the expense of forest structure and function is the highest and best use. And I almost didn't include this slide, but I just decided that I had to. I wanted to just like take a step back and make sure we all realize that wood, in fact, is an essential human need. That wood I know this sounds crazy, wood comes from forests that are managed to produce a variety of our human needs, ranging from shelter to heat, to the paper, to those cardboard boxes that magically appear on our doorstep from Amazon and other places, furniture, some really exciting new developments in wood. On the far left, you'll see the cross-laminated timber building at UMass, or at least when it was under construction. So really starting to do innovative things with wood, and then wood as an insulator as well. So I just want to, in the context of that last quote from the last slide, I just want to remind us that wood is an essential human need. And I know that it gets overshadowed by other benefits, but let's remember that wood is essential. We need to get it from somewhere, and that it is an environmentally friendly building product, and we need it. And that leads us to the illusion of preservation. In 2002, Harvard University student Mary Burlick, working with Dave Kittredge from here at UMass and David Foster at Harvard Forest, published The Illusion of Preservation. The original Illusion of Preservation estimated that Massachusetts produces a paltry 2% of the wood that its residents consumed, despite being a state dominated by resilient forests and boasting some of the most progressive forestry laws in the country. To put this into context, the original illusion estimated that Massachusetts was consuming 3 to 4 times more than countries with similar amounts of forest cover and population to forest ratios, while producing 5 to 17 times less than other countries with similar forest cover and populations. In short, we have a voracious appetite for wood products, and we have very limited, or have shown that we have very little interest in producing our own wood product needs. So what are some of these impacts of the illusion of preservation, or using the language from the quote, if those elsewhere produce for Massachusetts? And I'm going to outline a couple of bullets from the original illusion of preservation, just to underscore what we mean by the illusion of preservation. The publication describes that if we stopped harvesting in Massachusetts, that we are benefiting the environment. And in reality, our decisions to not harvest locally while continuing our voracious appetite for wood only increases impact by moving production to other places of the globe, including places that have less environmental oversight. We're very fortunate. We've got the Wetlands Protection Act, Forest Cutting Practices Act, Endangered Species Act. We've got licensed foresters, licensed timber harvesters. There is EPA, coastal zoning, slash laws. I mean, it is as heavy of a regulated industry as there is anywhere in the country in terms of timber harvesting. When this production gets outsourced to other places, there's just simply less environmental oversight. The places that we get wood from can be places that are very sensitive forest ecosystems, places like rainforests or old growth forests. There, of course, anytime you're moving wood around, pallets, logs, there is a risk of invasive insect transport. And we are, in many ways, sort of at the epicenter of insects, invasive insects, and really feeling the effects from emerald ash borer, Asian longhorn beetle, hemlock woolly adelgid, spongy moth. So we risk moving these things even faster around the globe. There are, in the United States, we have very efficient wood processing. And when wood is processed in other countries, some other countries, we tend to lose quite a lot of that wood. Up to 30–40% of that wood can be lost that would have been captured by processing it more efficiently locally. Of course, there are longer transportation distances, and that comes with significant energy costs, oil specifically, to move things around the globe. And as we found out in COVID, there is a real vulnerability to supply chains of all different kinds, but including our wood supply chains when we're getting them across the globe. There are a couple more of impacts that aren't mentioned in the original illusion that I wouldn't mind just laying out here while we've got this slide open and ready to go. One is the carbon impacts, and the original illusion was written in 2002, and it really predates this larger conversation about carbon. But I want to note that carbon is a global cycle, and that we don't avoid carbon impacts by not harvesting here and harvesting in other parts of the world. We also lose an opportunity to sustain other critical benefits that the end product, and I'll cover this at the end of the presentation, isn't necessarily the wood product itself, but the condition it creates, the amount of sunlight to regenerate species, diversifying habitats, creating more resilient forests. So we can lose that opportunity when we're not harvesting here. I don't know when this became a dirty word, but for some reason, anytime there is a timber harvest, this gets thrown in everybody's face. You're just doing it out of, quote, greed. And although certainly I'm not encouraging greed, I don't think it's bad that there be economic development from forest management and processing local wood products. A loss of rural traditions. We're getting, our state is getting to a point where we're losing agricultural traditions, we're losing forest management traditions, particularly in our rural areas, of course. And then this is, I know I might be getting out on a limb here a little bit, but I think it's at least important to name the fact that the reason we can push our production onto others is because, relatively speaking, we have a lot of affluence. And when you have affluence, you can make these kinds of decisions. And there's an ethical, moral question to that inequity of us not supplying our own needs, or at least more of them, and pushing that onto others that may not have that choice. So a couple of the impacts of the illusion of preservation. The original illusion of preservation helped seed in a conversation that was led by Harvard Forest, not only about local wood production, but the importance of sustaining other values from our forests through a combination of forest management and called wildlands, and of course, and woodlands as well. First focused on Massachusetts and then broadened to New England, the wildlands and woodlands vision urges a future in which most of our forests are permanently conserved for their many ecological, social, and economic values. Recent conversations regarding the critical role of our forests play in mitigating climate change through sequestering and storing carbon have led to calls to stop active forest management across the landscape, particularly on public lands, and seems to ignore that we are consumers of wood products. However, our forests are more than just carbon. Therefore, our strategies to sustain forests for their critical role in climate change mitigation must also seek to sustain the many other co-benefits of our forests, including taking local responsibility for the wood we consume. Forests can best be sustained not by focusing on one benefit over the others, but through strategies that restore forests. In other words, the diversity of benefits we seek must be sustained through a diversity of approaches across the landscape. Beyond the illusion of preservation seeks to update the original illusion, to expand the concept beyond Massachusetts to a New England-wide scale, and to do so within the context of the wildlands and woodlands vision, recognizing the crucial role of land protection and wildlands in our landscapes. Thus the title, Beyond the Illusion of Preservation. This has taken us several years, several long years, but very pleased to share some of the results that we came up with and the vision that we developed. So let's cut to the chase here. From a New England-wide perspective, the news is not all bad. New England is producing about 70% of our consumption. That's pretty good. But when you focus in on Massachusetts, you hear a different story. Our analysis suggests that we're producing about 7% of our consumption. Importantly, for those of you that remember one of the earlier slides, you can't compare the original 2002 illusion of preservation, which was 2%, with this current version because we didn't use the same methodologies. The 2002 version used volumes from the Forest Cutting Practices Act, and because other states don't have the Forest Cutting Practices Act, unfortunately, we weren't able to use that data. So we used a different methodology, so please don't try to compare those. The reality is, though, with either of the analyses, we're producing a very small amount of the wood that we consume. So at first blush, when you take a look across New England, you say to yourself, gosh, we're producing 70% of our wood products. That's not bad. But there's a more nuanced story here. From a regional perspective, Maine is producing 70% of New England's wood supply, while southern New England, that's us, is responsible for 70% of New England's consumption. So why is, in southern New England, a region so rich in resilient forests and consuming so much wood, producing so little? Why are the environmental, social, and economic implications of expecting others to carry the weight of our consumption? Herein lies the illusion. To try to dispel the illusion, we offer 3 steps that I'll talk about today. Foundational to sustaining the many benefits on which we all depend is land protection. We must ensure enough permanently conserved forests to maintain the ecosystem services they provide, including wood products. Consistent with the wildlands and woodlands vision, we recommend 70% of our landscapes be conserved permanently in forests, 10% as wildlands, and 60% as woodlands managed for a diversity of values. Landowners and those focused on land protection at state agencies and land trusts, like many of you, play a really critical role in achieving this first step. and it is the foundation of any future vision, is making sure that we stabilize our land base and stabilize, in this particular context, our forests. And I know that I'm preaching to the choir. The second step that we suggest is we just simply need to reduce our consumption. And we recommend, or in our vision, we suggest a reduction of about 25%. I will note that it's not just a reduction of wood consumption, although that's what we're talking about today, but as a society, we must reduce our consumption of all things, including wood products. Given the population of Massachusetts, this is an important role for not only those of us involved in the forest conservation community, but all of the residents of the Commonwealth. We can all chip in on this goal. We suggest a reduction of 25%, and with this reduction, a shift away from producing short-lived wood products to increasing the proportion of durable wood products we produce. So in other words, and that starts in our forest, producing less short-lived products such as pulp, paper, biomass, firewood, those kinds of wood products that come from trees that might be poor formed, low value species, those sorts of things, and shifting more towards the production of higher quality trees that will lead to higher quality, longer lived wood products. So things like saw timber and veneer that will go into things that can be built, cabinets, flooring, etc., that will hold carbon for longer amounts of time. This involves improving the overall quality of the forest, providing additional forest stewardship options in the future. The third step is expanding ecological forestry. And this has been a step that I've gotten a number of questions on. So I'm going to take a couple of slides and talk a little bit about this. So what is ecological forestry? Though we have a long and proud tradition of high quality forest management in Massachusetts, as I said earlier, guided by some of the most progressive forestry laws in the country, we're not just looking to produce wood. We want to produce it the right way, which means producing in a way that sustains the forests and the communities that depend on them. Importantly, ecological forestry isn't one silvicultural system. Instead, there are opportunities through ecological forestry to help sustain our ecologically young forests by focusing on increased structural complexity and regenerating diverse species that are predicted to do well in the future. We can implement ecological forestry at a variety of intensities across the landscape to achieve the diverse goals that landowners have. Foresters and landowners, of course, play an important role in achieving this step. Bottom line is that our forests are ecologically young. They're 100 years old. I know that sounds really old in human time, but it's really not old in forest time. So they're missing some structural components: dead wood, vertical structure, a heterogeneity across the horizontal plane. There are lots of different things that we're missing in our forests. Ecological forestry, rather than bringing our forest back to some previous time, seeks to restore that structure, those missing parts, those missing cogs and wheels, if you will, and therefore restoring forests to their full functioning. In doing so, ecological forestry strives to sustain the full diversity of our current and future forest benefits. So rather than focusing in on any one particular kind of benefit from forests, ecological forestry is really concerned with, or really focused on, restoring all parts, which includes everything from soil microbes to mycorrhiza to megafauna and everything in between. That the idea is, by restoring the structure and function of a forest, we can assist it in terms of moving through these challenges, and we can sustain our current benefits, and we can also provide opportunities for our future benefits. If we would have asked our colleagues 50 years ago, 100 years ago, and told them that we're now thinking about carbon as a product from the forest, they would think, we were crazy. And likewise, we don't know what benefits or what forest products, so to speak, will be necessary in the future. Ecological forestry focuses on the broad spectrum to sustain all parts of a forest. There are four really critical principles to ecological forestry, and I would want to make sure that I'm clear that ecological forestry isn't some complete deviation from the standard silviculture that we practice today. There are thousands and thousands of acres across Massachusetts applying standard silviculture that are just doing tremendous work and sustaining our public and private benefits. Ecological forestry is meant to build on that foundation of standard silviculture using these four principles. The first is continuity. We know that as we mimic nature, that natural disturbances, don't kill everything in a forest. There are lots of biological legacies left. Trees, large, medium, small, rootstock, seed bank, dead wood. There are lots of things that remain in the forest after a natural disturbance. These are the kinds of things that provide the benefits that we seek to carry as a thread from one version of the forest to the next. So when we talk about continuity in ecological forestry, what we're talking about is moving these critical elements, or some of them, to the next version of the forest. That means retaining a certain amount of trees, different species, different sizes, carrying the dead wood through to the next version of the forest. So making sure that our forests aren't starting at square one like they did 100 years ago, and instead, after a disturbance or some silviculture, they have parts from the last version of the forest carried through to sustain those benefits and help jumpstart that regeneration. The second is complexity and diversity. Structural complexity, as forests develop through time, they tend to get more structurally complex, meaning they get more vegetative layers, they get more dead wood, more diversity in tree sizes and ages, heterogeneity across. Some of the forest is really crowded and young. Others is sort of big trees widely spread out, and other parts of the forest are somewhere in between. So we want that structural complexity for the resilience. That's how forests have adapted over time. We want to try to restore that through ecological forestry. Same with species diversity. We don't want all of our eggs in one basket. We want different trees that regenerate and function in different ways. So as different challenges come through our landscape, we will reduce the amount of impact through that species diversity. The third principle, is context. We want to make sure that we're making stewardship decisions about that forest in light of the landscape around us. What's happening? Is this the only forested parcel? Is this parcel an important corridor? Is this parcel or forest we're making decisions on a part of a large block? What is the landscape context, and how does that inform our decision in terms of helping sustain these benefits? And then the last principle is time, that we want to operate on ecological time. And oftentimes that means waiting or giving forests an opportunity to grow large trees, to develop dead wood, to develop cavities in the trees, to slowly expand understory plants that take a long time to move across a landscape. So we want to make decisions based on ecological time as opposed to necessarily human time or financial time. Oftentimes, as I said, that means longer time periods, but I will say that there are opportunities to shorten some of these. For example, we have the knowledge to apply silvicultural tools to increase complexity and shorten some of those timeframes that we would likely need to wait on natural disturbances for that forest complexity. So ecological timing can be both waiting, and sometimes it can be intervening to speed the clock up. This is a couple of diagrams that my colleague Tony D'Amato and I have done for a book that we're writing. The top one shows sort of a standard, even-aged, 100-year-old forest, and the trees that you can see in color and the snag and the down wood represent what's being retained in standard forestry. In other words, most of the area within that forest is dedicated to growing trees for forest management. The ecological forestry illustration below that shows a different story. It shows a different amount of trees. So in other words, more trees, trees in different crown positions, trees of different species, including non-commercial species, trees in groups, singular trees across that forest that are being retained. That's it. That's that concept of continuity that I was talking about. These are trees that add to the future forest. The forest doesn't have to wait 100 or 200 years to develop a tree of that same size, or a tree with great cavities for wildlife, or the amount of dead wood that the forest and the regeneration processes have come to rely on. Some of those threads are carried through to that next phase. And I shouldn't say no, I shouldn't say some of, because there's some of them being carried through in the standard forestry, silviculture, but in ecological forestry, there's just more of a focus. More is being left. There's more room dedicated to that reciprocity of leaving more in the forest to help restore that structure and that function. So let's jump back out in our frame, talking about step 3 in terms of producing forest products through ecological forestry. And this is some of the analysis that Caitlin and Brian helped us do, which is if you start right off the bat with our New England forested landscapes and dedicate 10% of the total landscape to wildlands, consistent with the Wildlands and Woodlands vision, we're going to take these 10%, designate them. They're not going to be actively managed. They're going to be wonderful wild places that provide a suite of benefits that's different than the landscapes that are managed. They're not necessarily, at least in our vision, not necessarily evenly distributed. In other words, public lands carry more of that wildland than private lands, but on large, 10% of the landscape is dedicated towards wildlands. So if you were then to take 100% of the industrial forests, which are primarily in northern New England, if you were to apply ecological forestry to 50% of the public forests and 50% of the family forest owner and conservation org lands, and we've combined those acreages together, you come up with about 20 million acres of forest land across New England. And again, the 10% of the wildlands have already been set aside, so this is 20 million acres on top of that 10%. If you apply an average of 0.4 cords of growth per year, you come up with a number of 8 million cords. And I'm going to put that in context in the next slide. Before I do, I just want to pause a second. So if you're a forester, you work in the forestry world, you may look at that 0.4 cords with a little suspicion. And when we sent this out to review, a number of people commented that our 0.4 cords per year is lower than what New England forests on average produce. Some people, a very common estimate is more like 0.5 cords per year, and there are estimates out there of even 0.6 cords per year. We intentionally kept it at 0.4 as being conservative in recognition of the slide I just showed you, which is the intent of ecological forestry is to have more continuity, is to leave more in the forest, and that means harvesting less. And so we estimated at 0.4 cords. So when you do that math, 8 million cords, you can see that in our vision at 2060, across New England, production and consumption are now equal. And I should have said this up front. I'm a little embarrassed that I didn't. These knobs can be turned, right? You could turn it up to 0.5 cords per acre. You could turn down the amount of family forest owner land or turn up the amount of acres in public land being stewarded with ecological forestry. Our goal is not to be prescriptive with this. Our goal is just to put forth an idea. Our goal is just to start a conversation. Our goal is just to get people thinking about, is it possible? And we in fact think it's possible. And these might be stretch goals, but we feel like, we can demonstrate here that it's possible. So this isn't the only solution. I don't want to imply that at all. There are lots of knobs to turn up and down, but I hope what you'll get from this is just that it's possible. And as the numbers show, in 2060, we can in fact balance out production and consumption across New England. You will note in our red box here that Massachusetts is still not balanced. Let's move to our forest products here. We can drill down to the specific forest products. And again, we talked about moving from more of a lower grade product to more long-term, higher grade products. So you can see, if you squint, I guess, in Massachusetts, the mustard color are the saw log used in lumber. And so we've increased that to show that we're producing more long-term durable products. You can see that once you take out a reduced consumption, that we jump from 7% to 16%. So not, we're not balancing it out in Massachusetts, but we're more than doubling what we are already producing, both through a combination of reducing our consumption and increasing the amount of production that we have. Certainly, there is room for even more improvement, should that be of interest to people. And again, as I said, this is not meant to be prescriptive. This is just meant to be, something to start a conversation. So what might this look like across the landscape? So here is our heavily forested landscape with these state lands and conservation organization lands as real anchor points within our landscape. They're unique properties. They're, for one, much larger than the average family forest owner parcel. They oftentimes have a disproportionate landscape position of significance. So they're maybe at the top of a ridge, based on how land was bought by public lands way back when. They may have a disproportionate amount of endangered species. Maybe that's why they bought that land to begin with, or recreational opportunities. But these state and conservation organization lands are very important anchor points within our landscape of these large core areas of forest. And then I just want to demonstrate what this might look like. So here's, this is out in Western Massachusetts. This is the parcel map, and you can see how heavily parcelized our landscapes are in Massachusetts. I will say, hearkening back to an earlier slide, our landscapes aren't all that more parcelized than countries like Sweden and Finland and other places that do have much higher amounts of landowner engagement and wood production. So this is something that we can achieve. 50% of the forest owners engaged. That's what this looks like. And I'm very grateful to my former graduate student, Lynna Clifford, who painstakingly counted up acreage on all these parcels and developed a map just to give us a visual of what that might look like across our landscape. And of course, remember that applying ecological forestry can and should be done in a variety of intensities. My experience with landowners is every landowner is going to apply, has a unique set of goals, unique set of timing, and so therefore would just naturally apply a diversity of strategies in a variety of intensities across the landscape that would give us the heterogeneity that we seek. But applying those ecological principles will give us continuity from parcel to parcel that will help sustain those many benefits. So that's what it looks like on a map. I have gotten questions like, where on the landscape might you go? And there's a very straightforward answer. If you're just looking at your property, you can look at things like site quality, where do forest products go well, just like you might in an agricultural setting, where are the most fertile soils. You would want to certainly stay away from sensitive sites, wet soils, vulnerable sites, high erosion. You would want to take into account any vulnerabilities on your property. By that, I mean things like invasive plants, other vulnerabilities. You would want good access on your property. And you may even consider places where there might be educational opportunities along a road or along a trailhead if you're a conservation organization. But what I would really encourage you to think about it is it would be good to go out and do some active forest management and produce wood products. There's no question about it. But boy, we can really reach another level if we think about producing not wood, but producing condition within our forest. And the trees, the logs that are removed from that are really a byproduct of creating that condition. And you might want to create different conditions to regenerate different species of trees that need different light levels. You might want to create a different condition to create a different kind of habitat. You might want to create a different condition in your forest to increase its complexity and its resiliency. And so I guess I would encourage you, if you're thinking where on the landscape, think about where active forest management will help sustain these other benefits. What's the condition that will help you meet your goals? And then creating that condition oftentimes means removing trees, and that becomes the byproduct. The wood products become the byproduct. The other thing I just would just underscore, emphasize again is considering that landscape context. Where would you do this depends in part on what's happening around you. Are there opportunities to diversify habitat, or is yours a really unique habitat that should stay the same? Are there challenges within the landscape? Are the invasive insects or invasive plants sort of marching towards you? That would be something you need to take into consideration when making decisions about your own property or your fee-owned land or town land. So I recognize, and I've been working with family forest owners for a number of years now, that 50% is really sort of a stretch goal. And I wanted to, because this is the other question I get, well, how would you do that? How would you reach 50% of the landowners? And I guess in short, I would say it's a focus on relationship to the forest. I think we need to change that. Other countries, other cultures have a different relationship with their forests, a more engaged relationship with their forests and our relationship to one another. I think that's the focus. And to sort of illustrate some ways that I think this can play out and already is playing out, I just want to mention a couple brief case studies. So this is Harry and Michelle Webb. They live in central Massachusetts in Hardwick. They have 142 acres. Yeah, that's a pretty big property relative to other landowners, but I wouldn't say it's crazy big. They're in a unique landscape position. They are within a stone's throw of Quabbin. They abut mass wildlife land. They have some threatened endangered species on their property associated with Muddy Brook. They've worked to put a conservation restriction on with their local land trust, Go East Quabbin Land Trust. They apply using working with a consulting forester, Mike Morey, ecological forestry across their forest. They've also done a lot of work with habitat and decline for grouse, for grassland birds and so forth. And they've also implemented a lot of invasive plant control. They are, as active as a private landowner as I think I know of in Massachusetts. I just want to give you some of the numbers that Harry and Mike shared with me. Over the last 20 years, they've removed 357,000 board feet. Just to give you a sense of scale, a triaxle log truck that you might see heading down the road or heading up 91 to Canada carries about 4,000 to 5,000 board feet. So I'll let you do that math. That's a lot of log trucks leaving their property. A lot of cords, tons. They've even gotten 61 cords that they heat their home with. So you might say to yourself, well, what does the forest look like now? There is 1 million board feet still standing on their property. Mike has done a tremendous job of creating a resilient forest, lots of species diversity, lots of structural complexity, patch reserves throughout there, giving some amount of passive, combination of passive and active in the forest. So really tremendous. This is happening across our landscape. Here's a case study of Tony and Ann Borton. Unfortunately, they have since passed away, but When Biomap came out, they were a little, they were a little frustrated that their beautiful property in Conway, Massachusetts, didn't fall within a dark green core area. In fact, they looked on a couple different maps, and their property and their landscape wasn't really designated as ecologically important by the metrics used in those analyses. And Tony and Ann, they felt differently. They felt like it was a really special neighborhood, really special property, really special forested landscape. And so they got their neighbors together. Some of them they knew and others they didn't. They went to the assessors, they wrote letters, they made phone calls, they knocked on doors, and they pulled together a group of neighbors around their landscape up and down their rural road. And they pulled them together literally for pie and coffee and told their story about why they feel like this is a special place and why their family has made a decision to put a conservation restriction on their property. They had a representative from the local land trust there. And in fact, fast forward like 5-6 years, they and a number of their neighbors all conserved their land, adding several thousands of acres to abutting a wildlife management area. This is what happens when neighbors get together and talk and share information. One of the projects I'm involved in with funding from Mass DCR, the Working Forest Initiative, is helping inform open space committees. And one of the things we do is provide small grants. And I guess it was about 2 years ago now, the town of Wendell applied for a small grant to do some outreach to their landowners. They targeted large landowners in Biomap. They mailed every landowner that they targeted a map of their property. They reached 50 landowners who came to an event where they talked about forest management. They talked about land protection. They had a landowner or two get up and tell their story about stewarding their forest and putting a conservation restriction on. They had lunch from a local farm that was in town. And that resulted in a number of discussions that led to further events, walking each other's properties so people could get a sense of what the forest management looked like, what the experience of a conservation restriction is like. So big shout out to Dan, if he's on here in the Wendell Open Space Committee. This is what makes the difference. This is how you reach 50%. We mobilize at the local level in a peer-to-peer networking way. I was going to show you this video, which I love, from the Hilltown Land Trust, but we've run out of time to do that. So my understanding is Barbara has kindly loaded this link up into the resources section of the conference. I would encourage you, it's 5 minutes, 6 minutes. It's a great story of the Hilltown Land Trust having a timber harvest, primarily for wildlife benefit. And the result of that condition being created were logs that were milled at a local sawmill and then donated to a food co-op that built a porch out of them. You can walk into East Hampton to the River Valley Market there and look at the beautiful oak beams that were harvested no more than 10 miles from the store to create wildlife condition, enhance recreational value and this wonderful view of Greylock, as well as provide local wood products. So as a land trust, you provide, both on your fee simple land, a really important role in dispelling the illusion of preservation, as well as the opportunity to inform landowners of their options. So is engaging 50% of family forest owners possible? Absolutely. Other countries have this level of engagement, as I've said before, but it will take a cultural shift. Starting in World War I and then continuing through World War II, U.S. citizens were encouraged to grow their own food as a way to contribute to the war effort. Motivated by the war, citizens grew vegetables in yards, flower boxes, rooftops, anywhere there was space. Information about gardening, as well as the preservation of vegetables they were growing, was made available. Neighbors helped neighbors, each person applying strategies that fit their resources and their values. At its peak, Victory Gardens produced approximately 40% of the nation's produce. We can do this, but it's not going to happen through business as usual. It will take a sustained grassroots effort to build relationships and engage that 50% of the landscape. So I'll end with this quote, almost end, I guess. This is from M. Cat Anderson. She wrote a wonderful book called Tending the Wild. I encourage you to take a look at it. To both use and conserve nature requires a complex knowledge and practices, and I included, and relationships, far more complex than leaving nature alone. The reality is we are in nature. We use wood products. It's a good thing to use. Not as much as we do use, but it is a good thing to use. This relationship needs some tweaking. We need to reestablish a reciprocal relationship with our forests, recognize the benefits we get from them, and we can do that locally, and we can avoid some of the negative impacts that come with the illusion of preservation. I do want to let you know, since I've hit the active forest management drum pretty hard today, lest you think that it's nothing but logs for me, I will let you know that I am doing a webinar in a couple weeks that's being organized and hosted by the Forest Stewards Guild on understanding passive forest management to further ecological forestry. So in other words, how do we reach that other 10% goal across our landscape to match that active management? If you're interested, I believe Barbara has also uploaded a link that you can access to register for the free event. So thank you, MLTC. Thank you for this opportunity. Thanks for all the great work you do. You make, you increase all of our ability to conserve land. So we're grateful to you. And everybody have a great conference. I hope to see you there. I'll have a table. Please stop by if you're interested. I'll have publications and would be happy to answer any questions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Paul. That was great. So we have about 8 minutes, and I'm going to do my best to moderate so we can cover as many questions as possible that are in the chat there. And, you know, so there are a couple questions about what exactly is our consumption of forest products in Massachusetts? Like, what's the breakdown of how we're using the land? I think a little bit of your slide there that had the pulpwood and the lumber and the, but, you know, I don't know how much you want to get into the detail of that, but a related question in the chat is what happens as we start to reduce consumption of forest you know, you talked about the importance of reduced consumption. What sort of substitutes would emerge if we reduce consumption, and do some of those have unintended bad consequences, like hardy board or things that have forever chemicals in them? And, you know, like, do we start to get into some bad, you know,
Sure.
you know, just what's the impact globally of reducing forest products consumption here?
So I guess I'll take the second one first because I'm old and that's when I remember. So yeah, I mean, I please don't take my comments as use less wood and go to other things. That wood is a tremendously environmentally friendly product to use, and we should in fact use it. I'm just encouraging us to use it and produce it locally. Substituting out wood for, I don't know, concrete, steel, aluminum comes at energy costs that aren't even in the same ballpark. They're exponentially, you know, more energy costs from everything it takes to produce them, to transport them, to transform them into building products. Wood is a tremendously environmentally friendly. The amount of energy it takes to take it from tree to 2x4 or tree to timber frame is remarkably small. So I'm not advocating for substituting those out. We should use wood. We should just be more thoughtful about the gifts we get from the forest and using them wisely, using them more efficiently, recycling them where possible, and trying to use less of them.
Some of it's just reduce and reuse, I guess.
Yeah.
So there's another couple of questions, and some of this will probably be addressed in your April 2nd webinar. But what is meant by wildlands, and particularly in relation to the state's initiative, which you did speak about at the very beginning, does that mean no people allowed? Or that was one question. Another question was, what does it mean in terms of our ability to do some ecological management, even if we're not doing forest products?
Yeah. Great questions that we can talk more about at April 2nd if you're interested. I defer to the Northeast Wilderness Trust, Newt's definition of forever wild, which does allow passive recreation, which does allow invasive plant control, which does allow hunting. It does not allow building. It does not allow timber harvesting. But that's not to say you can't walk in there. You know, there are uses that are acceptable within that definition. My experience, and you all are more steeped in the land protection world than I am. My experience is that that's sort of a general definition, that no commercial timber harvesting, that new definition is pretty pretty common in the sense of when it's going to be used. That's a good one. There are those that are more extreme than that don't want any human intervention, including walking through and passive. And there are those that are a little looser with that definition. One of the things that I found in our recent study was there were landowners that really do take a passive approach, but they harvest 3 to 4 cords a year because they want to produce their own firewood. Are they no longer wildlands? You know, I leave that up to you. You know, the ultimate definition is letting natural processes be the driver. And the more you go into the forest and intervene, the less you're doing so. And at some point it tips over to active management, I guess. But this is a really important part of our landscape. The wildlands, the state reserves, sanctuaries like Mass Audubon. I know Kestrel's been doing a lot of work in this area. So these are really important, again, not adversarial, complementary components that provide benefits that are different than the benefits in a managed forest.
So I'm gonna ask two different questions that came in separately at the same time, so you can think about how to answer them. One had to do with you know, so our regulated environment, you know, in terms of forest practices, forest management practices, perhaps has an impact on shifting harvest demand to less regulated parts of the world, right? And maybe even the country. So, and that was one sort of question. You know, there's an economic reality here that drives consumption, but also there was another question about just sort of what's our capacity to increase consumption of local wood given the sawmill situation.
Great question. Both great questions, very astute. Yes, and I should have included a slide in there. We have lost tremendous amounts of infrastructure. In fact, the latest mill survey I have was done 20 years ago, 25 years ago by Gordon Boyce and Dave Damery here at UMass and DCR. And I could tell you what it is today. And in between, there's a very precipitous drop. So we have lost a lot of infrastructure that would require an investment in the forest industry, in more ability to mill locally. So there's no question about that. That would have to go hand in hand. And I know that's a conversation that DCR has been having. And the regulations. It's a double-edged sword. When I was a service forester and I regulated timber harvest, I was out in Western Massachusetts. The loggers from Vermont hated coming here because they didn't have any regulations in Vermont. And when they came here, they had lots of regulations. And the loggers in Connecticut had, it was like the Wild West. Every town had their own bylaw. And they were never sure what the bylaw was. And when they came to Massachusetts, it was uniform because it was a statewide regulation. So I think there are ups and downs to both. I think it's safe to say that more regulation costs more for the producer. And I've never had the experience of running a mill or being a logger, but you know, there's certainly economic considerations to that. But the reality is we have this tremendous infrastructure in terms of our regulations and our programs that we should be producing more here because we can do it well.
Walter, go ahead. If you can unmute, you can ask that question. Maybe the last question, Walter, if you're able to unmute. Let's see. Do you know how to? There you go.
You got it?
Yeah.
Just one thing I wanted to add here. As you know, maybe you do. I was in the logging business full time, doing my life and stuff, work sawmill. So in starting out something like this, particularly in Massachusetts, there's still a lot of people out there. Oh, gee, you can't cut trees. I think it'd be good to run a very brief introduction, including what Massachusetts looked like in 1840 when it was 80% denuded. And all these stuff. Now look at where we are. We have more trees now than I've ever seen in my life, certainly. Fields that I got herded the cows in have grown up. The other aspect of it, the trees are huge, bigger than anything. I wish I was a logger today. Tremendous trees. Third thing is there's houses all throughout them. And if we have a hurricane of 38 or even a big wind, it is going to be catastrophic. So then you want to go and cut the logs. They're full of metal. I was running into metal all the time, the mill, when I was cutting trees. So you have to balance out and look at all these aspects. We've got plenty of timber around that should be harvested for safety reasons. But anyway, I just throw that out there.
Yeah. No, that's good, Walter. I appreciate it. You're right. You know, we've got plenty of forests. We've got plenty of opportunity. Our forests to date have shown themselves to be very resilient, and that's just all the more reason to do it well, to do it locally. And I guess I'll leave it there, Rob. Just thank you. And again, it's not meant to be prescriptive. It's meant to just get us thinking. Like, what are we doing here? You know, we in our farm to table culture, you know, we're insistent on it, and yet here we just sort of like lose our mind and never think about where the wood is coming from, what those impacts are. We can do it well. We can do it well here. So I very much appreciate it. If you have questions you didn't have a chance to ask, I'll be at MLCC and I would love to talk to you.
And maybe we'll pull a couple from the chat and share them with you, Paul, in case you can answer them offline. But thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one of these. Take care. Bye-bye.